You have probably never heard the name Cassius Marcellus Clay. It is one of the many names that have faded into the history books, but if you look closely enough, you can see that Cassius Clay was a truly fascinating character in Kentucky and American history. Because of this man, our nation is the way it is today, all because of Cassius Clay, the Lion of Whitehall. Cassius Marcellus Clay was born on October 19th, 1810, in his father's house, Whitehall, located in Madison County, Kentucky. His father, Green Clay, was a wealthy landowner, politician, and businessman, owning more than 40,000 acres of land and being one of the largest slave owners in Kentucky history. Clay's views on slavery changed when he attended a speech by abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison while attending school at Yale University. Years later, Clay would write in his memoirs that Garrison's logical view on slavery
burned like a branding iron into the most callous hide of the slaveholder and his defendants. This was a revelation to me. I felt all the horrors of slavery. My parents were slaveholders. I regretted it as I did other evils of humanity as the fixed law of nature or of God, and submitted as best I could. But Garrison dragged the monster from his citadel and left him stabbed to the vitals and dying at the feet of every logical and honest mind.
From that moment on, Clay dedicated his life to being an abolitionist, even setting free the 40 slaves that he had inherited from his father, virtually throwing away hundreds of thousands of dollars, all in the name of freedom. Cassius served 3 terms in the Kentucky House of Representatives, but lost support when he promised to end the moral evil called slavery. Another way Cassius tried to help free the slaves was by making speeches all across the state of Kentucky. Many times during these speeches, pro-slaveholders would try to kill Clay just because of what he believed was right. But Clay would fight back, and many of these assassins would end up dead or close to it. These encounters showed that Cassius was one to be taken seriously, and if anyone ever got in his way, they would surely face the consequences. In 1845, Clay continued his fight against slavery by publishing an abolitionist newspaper called The True American in the heart of Lexington, Kentucky. After receiving multiple death threats, Clay decided to arm himself. In one issue of The True American, Clay wrote,
I selected for my office a brick building, and lining the outside doors with sheet iron to prevent it from being burned, I purchased 2 4-pounder cannons and placed them with loaded shot and nails on a table breast high.
The True American continued to thrive in Lexington, selling subscriptions all across America. But when Cassius was on his sickbed with typhoid fever, the slaveholders saw their time to strike. They called themselves the Committee of 60, and they marched down to the True American with a fake court order led by James B. Clay, Cassius's second cousin and son of famed politician Henry Clay. The committee seized Clay's publishing equipment and left, leaving the True American with nothing to print with. After the raid on the True American print shop, Clay decided to move his business to Cincinnati, Ohio, where abolitionist views were more widely accepted. There, he continued to publish the True American while still living in Kentucky. Cassius continued his fight against slavery by helping start the Republican Party in 1854. When Abraham Lincoln ran for president in 1860, Clay put all of his efforts into campaigning for him. When Lincoln won the election, he awarded Clay for his efforts by giving him the ambassadorship to Russia, a position of which Clay took. Not everyone liked Cassius, though. Secretary of State William Seward had this to say about Clay.
This man certainly the most wonderful ass of the age. It is prosperity that has developed the fearful underlying vanity that poisons his whole character.
Clay's mission in Russia was simple: keep good relations with the Russians. It was feared that England and France, wanting the goods the South produced, would ally with the Southern states, causing a load of problems. Cassius's job was to have the Russians put enough pressure on Britain and France so the war would not have to go any farther than it had to. The only question now was if Clay could succeed in his mission. In the past, U.S. ambassadors had not had a good experience in Russia. Former ambassador to Russia, John Randolph, despised the position so much so that he returned to America on the same ship that he arrived on. Francis Dana, another ambassador who arrived in St. Petersburg in 1781, served only 17 months and left without the Empress ever knowing of his existence. It was crucial that Clay stayed in Russia and kept the royal family on good terms with the U.S. The fate of the Union laid in Cassius's hands. While Cassius was traveling through Europe on his way to St. Petersburg, he tried to strengthen the weakening bonds the U.S. had with England. In a letter to the Times of London newspaper, Clay played on the English's hatred of slavery, which they had abolished in 1834. He also stated that the southern states were still a part of America and they were committing treason by rebelling. Cassius also spoke in France, rallying the crowd in his favor. He was doing the job he was assigned, and he would not stop until it was complete. Cassius and his family arrived in Russia in 1861 and met Tsar Alexander II. Tsar Alexander had recently freed the 23 million Russian serfs that were the slaves to his society, so it is safe to assume that he and Clay had much in common when it came to the hatred of enslavement. Clay, in his memoirs, later wrote this about the Tsar.
He was not a brilliant man, but he was a man of good common sense. If he was not equal to the times in which he lived, it was rather because such great changes were too strong for any man.
Cassius surprisingly thrived in Russia. He attended numerous balls and dinners staged by the Russian elite. Clay even showed the Russians his extravagant lifestyle. He later went on to say in his memoirs,
I gave the Russians an idea of my taste and training, for they had all that money could buy or genius invent for all the pleasures of life. If they liked flowers, I accommodated them. If paintings, I had some of the rarest. If wines, I had every sample of the world's choice. If menu was the object, nothing was their wanting.
Cassius was sent back to America in 1862. His replacement was a man by the name of Simon Cameron, a man who caused so many problems for Abraham Lincoln that the only way to get rid of him was to send him out of the country. While Cassius was leaving Russia, a diplomat begged for the White House to let Clay stay. He said,
I beg you to convey to the President of the United States on behalf of His Majesty and the Russian people our heartfelt sympathy for the maintenance of the Union. I also beg of you to say to the President to use his influence with Mr. Clay to remain with us, for his knowledge aids us greatly. He is especially liked not only by His Imperial Majesty, but all those with whom he comes in contact.
Cassius had done the job he had set out to do. The Russians had made it clear where their loyalties lied, and this made the other European nations back off on the thought of helping the Confederate States. Because of Cassius Clay's efforts, thousands of lives were saved. Some believe that because of Clay, World War I would be pushed back 50 years. This is what historian Danny Gift has to say about the matter.
He has made an incredible impact, and actually in one way that we talk about constantly on our tours that a lot of people don't think about. And that's that while he was in Russia, he convinced Russia to come in on the side of the Union during the Civil War if, and only if, England and France came in on the side of the Confederacy. Now there had been some talk of it at the time because England and France were doing so much trade with the Deep South that if the South lost slavery, they were going to lose some money. But Russia stepped in and said, oh, well, if you're playing the game, so are we. And it was enough to scare them off and keep them out of the war. He effectively postponed World War I by several decades. I mean, that easily could have been our first World War if everyone else would have jumped in to the aid of the Union and Confederacy.
Cassius was sent back to Russia in 1863 with another task assigned to him by the U.S. government. This task was to have the Russians sell Alaska. Russia again showed to the world in 1863 their support in America by sending 6 warships to patrol U.S. waters. This act relieved America greatly and was again made by Cassius Clay's efforts in Russia. In 1867, because of the U.S. and Cassius's efforts, America bought Alaska for $7.2 million, which would equate to about $133 million in today's times. Though Clay is mostly credited for keeping good relations with the Russian royal family, it is rumored that his longtime enemy, William Seward, took credit for most of Clay's work. Cassius returned to Kentucky in 1869, where he continued his work as a politician. Throughout Clay's life, he was called the Lion of Whitehall, Whitehall being the house that he called home. But why was he called a lion?
He was called a lion because he was portrayed as being very strong in his views, and he was very aggressive in his views. So, his opinion was incredibly unpopular, but he kept going between the newspaper and being part of the Kentucky State Legislature, and then going on to be ambassador. He was doing all of these things to work toward ending slavery and work toward creating this great relationship with Russia. And to do that, you had to be incredibly aggressive. So he became known as the Lion.
Cassius died on July 22nd, 1903, in his house, Whitehall, which he had been living in for so many years. Cassius's impact on modern society is almost unfathomable. It is because of a man by the name of Cassius Clay that our nation is the way it is today. It is because of the Lion of Whitehall.